Greetings, one and all, and welcome to the Infinite Journey podcast. I'm Paul James Caden, and on today's show, we are going to be talking about the Urantia Book and paranormal activity. What does the Urantia Book say about ghosts and things that go bump in the night? Opinions vary, and I thought I would throw my 2 cents into the ring of this topic for those who are interested. And it's nice to switch gears and get back to a subject that's a little more spiritual, but not so much of this government and political upheaval and the conspiracies and everything that's happening on the social level. I mean, those are important topics that we need to talk about and try to put them in a certain realistic spiritual perspective. But I don't want this to be a show that continually talks about those subjects. So let's get on with some spiritual conversation. Let's talk about the Urantia Book and paranormal activity. What does the Urantia Book say? What do people who study and read the Urantia Book think? Are there ghosts? Do the spirits of the dead come back? Or is something else going on? Well, for the most part, folks who read the Urantia Book say, well, there's no such things as ghosts. The Urantia Book does tell us that the spirits of the dead, they move on to the mansion worlds. Those souls continue their journey into eternity, and they don't come back to the earth. So many who read the Urantia Book say ghosts and things that go bump in the night, hauntings, paranormal activity, it's either figments of people's imagination, or it is what the Urantia Book calls midway creatures or midway beings. The Urantia Book does teach that there is many different classes of spirits and angels around us that all have a function in helping to keep the universe running and keep a certain order going in our world, as they try to lead us to a better society and ultimately to the presence of the Paradise Father, which is God in heaven. So most of your Urantia Book readers will say, no, there's absolutely no such things as ghosts. It's something else. And most are convinced it's figments of the imagination. But I would say to that, and I was actually having this discussion with some folks on Facebook, because someone did post the question, and that's what inspired this podcast. What does the Urantia Book say about ghosts and paranormal happenings? And, my thoughts on it are that the Urantia Book never claims to be an infallible document. It was never supposed to be a book that was like the Bible or the Quran or the Torah. And if you look into the history of the Urantia Book, and there's a really good book called The History of the Urantia Papers by Richard Mullins, I believe the gentleman's name is. And it's a little bit hard to find in hard copy, but it is available on the Amazon ebook Kindle store. So, any way you can get a hold of it, I definitely think it is a great read. And it weighs out the pros and the cons, the problems, and the things that were right and the things that maybe were not so right when it comes to putting the Urantia Book together. But one thing that this book points out very clearly is that the Urantia Book was never supposed to be a fetish book or a book that was put on a pedestal and worshipped like, some people would worship almost the Bible or the Quran. Some people believe that in the Muslim tradition, that the Quran, the book itself, is almost or is God on earth. So the Urantia book was never meant to be that, and this is why the early manuscripts, it is believed, were said to be destroyed once the book was published in 1955. The celestial beings who brought the papers into being didn't want anybody, putting the original manuscripts in glass cases and worshiping them and turning them into, a fetish or an idol or, another charm that man, looks at as being, holy and sacred. The Urantia book was really meant to be, uh, a group of papers that was for the individual to help give the individual certain information and help them with their journey and their personal experience and relationship with God. It was never really meant to be something that had, churches or, organizations and denominations, forming around it. It's also said of the Urantia book that the beings who materialized the papers found our language a bit difficult to put everything in the papers clearly. So it was the language that is used uh, was put there to the best of our ability to, be able to understand what was being said, but it was not an easy task to break down such complex information into our very uh, simple language. So, with that being said, and it comes to uh, paranormal activity, ghosts, and spirits, I personally don't believe that there's any book, on the face of the earth that has all of the answers. I think the Bible has quite a few answers. I think the Urantia book has many, many answers to things. But, I think it's, for me personally, human error to think that we contain any book or books that would, in between the two covers, front and back, no matter how many hundreds or thousands of pages that book might be, to think that that book contains everything we need to know and every mystery of the universe. That would be, impossible when it comes to such a great, wise, infinite, all knowing being like God. To think that we could, encapsulate that into, one volume, I think is kind of um, maybe a little ignorant, maybe a little arrogant of us to think that we could do that or have that in this world. And I think a lot of people do, because I think it's natural for people to look at certain books and say, this is the entirety of the truth. Mankind, we as human beings, we want all the answers. We don't like to have guesswork. We don't like the mystery. We like to be able to say, aha, I know exactly what it is. I know, exactly the answer to that, even if it's just a guesstimation. Even the Bible itself, a lot of people, particularly in the evangelical, fundamentalist, literalist Christian circles, say that the Bible is God's literal word. It is a God-breathed document or book. But this is something that is far from what the ancients themselves believed. The ancient Christians taught that the Bible was an inspired book, Men were inspired by the Holy Spirit and wrote down these accounts of Jesus' life, the research that they did. The Gospel themselves talk about these are the accounts written by certain individuals. The letters of Paul, the Apostle Paul never thought he was writing scripture. He was writing letters to different congregations and churches of his day. And it was later when, the church councils included them in the canon of scripture. But Paul never uh, had any inkling or thought that these letters he was writing that I'm penning scripture. And that's something very interesting that many scholars and theologians will point out that will make the average layperson go, "Oh, I never really thought of that before." So we have documents that are letters, we have documents that are individuals' personal research or investigation into the events of the life of Christ, like the Gospel of Luke. And so these are inspired letters, inspired documents. But these books and letters, though they were inspired by God, they were written by fallible man. And the ancient church, the very beginning Christians, taught that this is why we find certain errors in the Bible, or the same story told in two different gospels, but it's different because God inspired, but man wrote. It wasn't God channeling word for word, the words of the Bible like some fundamentalists would believe. That's not what the early Christians believed at all, and they would uh, probably look at you sideways if you, as I always say, took a time machine back and presented this view to them. So, all of that being said, uh, to believe we have, any book, any documents that give us all of the answers, I think we're kind of grasping there, and we're throwing, our hat into the arena of opinion, along with many other scientists and scholars and theologians and philosophers. So when it comes to paranormal activity or ghosts, I don't think we can sit back and so, kind of arrogantly say, oh, that's just imagination. Oh, people need to stop, sniffing, that glue or whatever they're doing, and just kind of laugh it off. Because the evidence and the research shows that something is going on in our world, and something has gone on in our world for centuries. There have always been people who claim that they saw their deceased mother or father or a grandparent or a sibling. And sometimes these encounters just happen, and other times, many times, they happen when a person is going through a crisis. And, they're saying, I wish my mother were here. I wish my father was here. And then suddenly in a dream or the apparition appears and, gives them, some kind of instruction or a message. And again, sometimes this just happens randomly. But many times these messages and these appearances will change lives or even save lives in certain instances. When I talk about this subject, I always hearken back to, I believe it was Dr. Raymond Moody who recorded the incident in one of his books about near death, and after death experiences, where there was a gentleman driving in his car and he had an accident, and the car flipped and was rolling down an embankment. And during the process, the gentleman driving the car was thrown from the vehicle, and he landed at the bottom of the hill and looked up to happen to see the car tumbling straight for him. and he scrambled to his hands and knees. He was about to jump out of the way to dodge the oncoming car that was rolling down the embankment. And suddenly he looked up and he saw his father, who had been dead for years, standing there holding out his hand as if to say, "Stop, don't move." And the man just froze in shock. What is my father doing here? And just at that moment, the car rolling down the hill kind of jumped and landed right where the man would have leapt to try to get to safety. So, things like this happen more than we hear about, more than we know. So, what's going on? I believe, or rather, I don't believe, that the spirits of the dead are hanging around, haunting planet Earth. Um, I've always believed, and that's why I say I like the Urantia book and I relate to it so much because it talks about things I've always kind of thought about or believed, but I have never really heard anybody else discuss or preach a sermon about or talk about in any way. And I've always believed, and I think the Urantia book certainly confirms that belief that the souls of the departed go onward. They have their journey. They have their next step in whatever comes next. They're not hanging around on Earth all the time. You hear people, particularly in spiritualist, circles, and sometimes just average people that, do you think my mother is around me? Is my mother my guardian angel? Is my grandmother my guardian angel? They think their deceased relatives are watching over them all the time, every day. And, I think that is a mechanism or a belief that we've come up with to comfort ourselves. My dear relative, passed on, but somehow they're still here watching over me, even though I can't see them. I just don't think that is the case. What would be the point of people dying, making their transition into the world that comes next, but they just stay here? They're just here observing earthly life and watching over us. I think um, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I think that would be like someone being born but staying in the crib all their life. I should never leave this crib. Even when I'm 50 years old, I got to be here watching over my stuffed kitty and my rattle and, my favorite blanket or whatever. You know, People change and grow. We change and grow when we move on from this world. So I don't think our loved ones are constantly hanging around. Nor do I think, and I've discussed this in other podcasts that I've had, when it comes to spiritism and spiritualism, um, I don't think folks that, consider themselves mediums, I don't think it's possible to dial up any spirit that we want at any time. I feel like talking to mom today. Cha-ching, well, there she is. Oh, today I feel like talking to my uncle. Well, cha-ching, there he is. I don't think that that is realistic either. I don't think heaven is at our beck and call. Sometimes people may meditate, sometimes people may reach out in prayer to try to connect or feel something from their loved ones, and they'll get some very interesting information or even see like a vision, and they'll be like, wow, where did that come from? I've had that happen in my life. And those visions were later confirmed by other sources, things that, I never thought of or seen before. But it's not the norm. And I think there are rules in the spirit world that when we do see our loved ones, when we do feel them around us, it is by the permission of God. I think there's universal and heavenly laws and rules that must be abided by, and just like we can't walk over into their world anytime we want and say, "Oh, hey, what's up, everybody?" I don't think they can just pop into our world anytime they want and do whatever they want. I definitely think there are rules. We don't understand them. There's a lot, very little that we actually know about the world beyond this world. But I don't think it's a free for all where any spirit does whatever they want. We can call on anybody we want anytime. But again, that doesn't mean that we don't sometimes have those visions, those feelings, those apparitions of a loved one, of an angel, and things of that nature, because they do happen. But how they happen, why they happen, again, I think is part of the mystery. Just to kind of relate a story, why do these things happen? I remember some years ago, it was late August, early September. And in New York State, where I live, you'll start to get some little patches of orange or yellow on some of the older trees that time of year. And my mother, who passed away in 2012, she had a pet name for me. She called me Dingaling. And you know, every fall, I'd see her in the fall when the leaves would start to change. She'd always go by the window and say, "Look, Dingaling, our season's coming," and she'd point to one of the trees that was getting some color. And because we love the fall. We love fall. We love the Christmas time. I definitely got that from my mother. And so a few years ago, yeah, had gone to the chiropractor, and I was on my way home, and I'm just driving. I'm not thinking of anything in particular. I wasn't thinking of deceased relatives or anything of that nature. And suddenly I hear, it wasn't like an audible voice, but it was like my mother's voice so clear in my head. I heard her say, "Look, Dingaling, our season is coming." And I felt at that moment just intuitively that I needed to look up toward my left. And when I did, I saw this tree with this swath of orange leaves, starting to appear on it. And when I looked at those leaves, it was the strangest thing is that my mother's presence was so thick in the car with me. I mean, I could just feel her, and it was so overwhelming. I actually had to pull the car over and just sit there for a moment. It was both spiritually and, of course, emotionally, impactful to have that happen. And, her presence just hovered there so strong, like it was filling the inside of that car. And then little by little, it just lifted. So how did that happen? Why did that happen? Did my mother at that particular time just, for whatever laws and rules, keep the universe and the world of the spirit, moving forward? Was she granted some permission to just pop in and say hi, to say, "Hey, Dingaling, look," like she used to? You know, it was uh, it was strange, but it was very cool. And I'm grateful for things like that when they happen in my life. It's not like they happen every day, but when they do, I definitely give thanks to God. Just that my opinion is love is the thing that connects us to God, and it connects us to our loved ones for all of eternity. So, from doing a lot of research on this particular topic and also having my own experiences throughout life with things I couldn't explain, I definitely know that there's more to the world and the universe than meets the eye. And as I said before, I don't think that there's any book, whether it be the Bible or the Quran or the Torah or the Urantia Book, I don't think there's any book that gives us all of the answers. Some, but not all. I think all of them have kind of like pieces of the puzzle that if we really kind of think about it, we get a larger, more accurate picture of what might be going on in some of these instances. Even in paranormal research and sciences, there's a lot of debate on what hauntings are. Are they the ghosts of people? Are they spirits who are, they died and they're stuck? They haven't crossed over as many ghost hunters say. Or is it just like a mental or psychic energetic imprint on the land or in a house that it's not actually, it's more like a thought form than a conscious, living, motivated soul of a person walking around haunting the place or going. A lot of these ghosts, they say, go through repeated motions. They always walk up the stairs, down the hall, crying, and then walk into the first bedroom to the left. There's apparitions that repeat that same behavior over and over and over. And some paranormal investigators and those who are involved in the sciences of parapsychology say, you know, these things look like, seem like they could be a thought form or an energy imprint, not an actual spirit that is stuck. And in some cases, I believe folks are correct when they say that a haunting is something that is non human, something that we would call um, demonic or, a negative or dark entity. This certainly happens too. Not one shoe fits every foot when it comes to these instances, but that doesn't mean we can discount them by the wholesale. We can come up with all of the answers that we want, what this particular book said or what, this particular holy book said. But again, I don't think one shoe fits every foot, and there's a lot that we don't understand. And I definitely think that there is paranormal activity that is friendly. It is orchestrated by God, by heaven, like my mother in the car. I think there is paranormal activity that is orchestrated by something else that may not be so friendly. And of course, there are figments of people's imagination. As someone who I used to be very big into ufology back in the 90s, and I was somewhat of an amateur ufologist. I would go out into the field and watch the skies. I did a lot of reading and digging into that topic of UFOs. And you heard a lot of ufologists say that you have to be very careful when you're interviewing people about what they saw in the skies, because there are some people that will see a 747 fly overhead and they'll say, "Oh, look, it's a UFO." Everything's a UFO. The stars, the planets, an airplane, old airplane, new airplane, someone who threw a football through the sky, everything's a UFO. And boy, they weren't joking, because uh, being a bit of an amateur ufologist and talking to people and going out and watching the skies, I definitely ran into more than a few people that um, would see the 747 and go, "Oh, look, that's not one of ours. That's not an airplane." Even if it came down to saying, "Oh, it looks like an airplane, but UFOs can make themselves look like an airplane, so it's not really an airplane." So it's the same thing with, ghosts and paranormal activity that I think some people just become so obsessed with it on some level that they see it everywhere, even when it's not there. And so once again, with these kind of accounts, we have to, begin to separate fact from fiction, truth from lie, the sane from those who maybe leave a little bit to be desired in that particular department. But I definitely think that there's more to the world and the universe and paranormal happenings than we know. And so for me, anyway, I keep an open mind, an open heart, and just let God run the show. If I'm pleasantly surprised by a visitation from my mother or an angel or see something, wonderful, having a spiritual experience, I just give thanks for it and I remain open to it. Who am I to, no pun intended, close the book on God and say, nope, none of it's real. None of that exists. I think for me, that's limiting God. And that's something I've personally never wanted to do. So, folks, I thank you for listening to the show today. I hope you enjoyed our discussion. I hope you got something out of it. Chime in. Let me know what you think. Send me an email, nocturnalmagic@gmail.com. Comment if you're listening to this on one of the video platforms on the internet like YouTube, and let me know your thoughts. What is paranormal activity? Does it exist? If you're a reader of the Urantia book, what's your theory and why? I look forward to seeing what folks have to say. Until next time, as always, stay safe, stay well, and I'll see you next time here on the Infinite Journey.